Please be advised, this episode does have content that some may find distressing. As always, listener discretion is advised and it is not suitable for anyone under the age of 13.
Hello and welcome to episode 40 of It's Murder Up North. This is going to be part 1 of 2, and I will explain my reasons as the episode progresses. This is a case that many of you will have heard about, and I have had a number of requests to cover it. The case also exemplifies how such crimes are covered in the press, with the focus on the salacious aspects, sadly overshadowing those who really matter. This episode will be focused on the lives and deaths of the victims, who I will warn you are children. I found it a hard incident to cover, but these children were alive, energetic and filled with potential, only for it all to be taken away and their memories sullied by the perpetrators' actions. My podcast of the week is from the wonderful Kate, who hosts Ignorance Was Bliss. Kate has a wealth of knowledge which shines through in every episode. Here is a sneak peek.
Hey, this is Kate. I'm a forensic psychologist and crisis clinician, and I collect stories. Everything from true crime to trauma to parenthood. There's a lot more in common between depression and sociopathy, or between serial killers and podcasters, than you might think. Are you sure you really want to know? This is Ignorance Was Bliss at iwbpodcast.com and IWB Podcast on social media.
Now, let's head to the episode. The children squealed as they leapt out of the family minibus. Holding their school bags over their heads, they raced towards the front door as the rain thundered on the garden path. Their dad turned the key in the lock, and before he had chance to open the door, 6 pairs of feet scurried past him, and they all shot off in opposite directions in the 3-bedroom, semi-detached house. The large, flat-screen TV came to life with the bright colours and upbeat sounds of a children's TV show. In the kitchen, their mum was preparing tea time, chicken nuggets and chips. 13-year-old Duwayne, a tall and slender lad, disappeared upstairs. Closing his bedroom door, he proceeded to remove his violin from its case. He had just started to learn, and though he was still a little bit off on the odd note, he was definitely improving with practice. This was despite the disruptions from his little brothers, who idolised him and wanted to follow him around everywhere he went. As his youngest brother, 5-year-old Jayden, knocked on the door for the 3rd time, Duwayne opened the door and sternly told the little boy to go away, before shutting the door firmly and returning to his violin practice. The teenager loved his siblings, but living in the cramped 3-bedroomed council house, it was hard to get time alone. Jade, the only girl in the house, called upstairs to her brother Duwayne to tell him tea was ready, before she disappeared back into the living room to help get her little brothers seated on the sofa, making sure they each had a drink. Jade was just 10, but she was intelligent and nurturing, described as a mother hen. She would be there to comfort her siblings when they got hurt, and would shout at them if they were naughty. And she had to do just that when 9-year-old John began antagonising his little brothers. That was just John. He was cheeky and a troublemaker, with a talent for being able to get himself out of trouble with a quick answer and a mischievous grin. But his antics went too far, and his 6-year-old brother Jesse retaliated, which only landed Jesse in trouble. After a telling off by his mum, the 6-year-old stomped off in a sulk to his bedroom, but big brother Duwayne was able to coerce him back downstairs. The family sat before the television. 13-year-old Duwayne perched on the sofa arm. 10-year-old Jade sat beside 5-year-old Jayden on the sofa, next to their mother, who was trying to balance eating her food while cuddling 8-year-old Jack. He was the quiet one in the family, a shy but content child who loved nothing more than to sit on his mum's lap for a cuddle. Laid on their fronts on the rug were 9-year-old John and 6-year-old Jesse, carelessly swinging their legs in the air. As they all ate, the house fell quiet, as the family were captivated by the television. Once they had all finished, Jade helped clean up the plates and proceeded to help her mum with the washing up. Her brothers, meanwhile, decided to have a wrestling match on the floor, each trying to best the other until the game ended in tears, with John running to his mum for comfort. The end of the game meant bedtime, and like in any household with children, bedtime was a hectic affair, with the children fighting over the bathroom, tantrums and tears. But soon all 6 siblings were cuddled up in one bed watching a film. Slowly, one by one, the children fell asleep, and a silence descended on the house. Outside the street was dark, and rain continued to fall, while the wind whistled and wailed. In a house opposite, where the 6 children lived, resided Darren and James Butler, 2 brothers who often observed the children playing in the street together, filling the area with life and laughter. Jamie Butler commented, quote, "They were all well looked after. You would walk past and see them all in the window, bouncing around on the settees or on the street playing football. They were always happy and they never wanted for anything." It was nearly 3:30 a.m, and unable to sleep, Jamie was sat in the living room, watching television, when his attention was drawn to the sound of shouting across the street. Curious, he rose to peer through the curtains, noting a strange orange glow encroaching through the gaps in the fabric. As he drew the curtains open, his eyes were drawn immediately to the flames leaping from the doorway of the house across the street. Without hesitation, Jamie called his brother Darren, and they both headed over to the home, still in their nightclothes, with an unspoken mission to ensure the children were safe. The fire raged intensely, already turning the front door into a wall of flame, which was impassable. Desperately, the brothers looked for another way in. The living room window was blackened with soot, and the fire had already taken hold, so there was no way to gain access at the front of the house. The entrance to the rear of the property was blocked by a caravan, which was positioned between the house and the neighbour's fence. The brothers, driven by their desire to help, pulled themselves up on the roof of the caravan and jumped down into the back garden, where the children's parents gazed up at the bedroom windows paralysed. Wearing nothing but his slippers and pyjama bottoms, Jamie attempted to gain entry via the kitchen at the rear of the property. Entering the smoke-filled room, the intensity of the heat hit him and stole his breath. Burning his throat, he coughed as he choked on the innocuous smoke. But he continued to battle on, knowing that 6 children were trapped upstairs. He managed to reach the living room. The smoke alarm blared, and amidst the noise, Jamie could hear the family's parrot squawking and crashing into its cage. But he could not see the poor creature. The searing heat, blinding flames, and the stinging smoke fought him back. He tried to push on, but each step he was driven back. In desperation, he tried once more. But his skin began to scorch, and his lungs filled with smoke. He had no choice but to retreat back outside. He relived this moment during an interview on the documentary Crimes That Shook Britain. Have you ever seen a fire? Have you heard a fire speak to you? No? I have. And it wouldn't let me nowhere near them, just howling at you the more closer you got. You wouldn't know until you smell it. It's like putting your mouth over a car exhaust and taking a deep breath. Bearing in mind I never had no t-shirt on, or nothing to cover my mouth. I was going nowhere. My heart was just beating faster and faster. Push forward, push forward. But he and his brother were not finished. They tried desperately to open the windows in the upstairs rooms. They tried desperately to smash the glass. They could feel the intense heat with every blow of their fists. The pair worked tirelessly to rescue the children. Flames flashed across the ceiling of the bedroom, and the window blackened like a blind being drawn shut. And just before it did, Jamie caught a glimpse of 10-year-old Jade, the orange glow illuminating her features as she lay in slumber on the bed. Seeing her made Jamie more determined to get to her, but his attempts were stopped by the fire brigade, who took over the rescue efforts. Jamie relived his attempts to rescue the children, quote, "That little girl was right there, and there was no way I could touch her. I couldn't lay my hands on her. I'm just glad they weren't screaming, that's all, 'cause that would have done it then. Darren, Jamie, and a number of other neighbours who had attempted to enter the property congregated on the street in front of the burning house, amidst the rain and the blue and red lights of the emergency vehicles lighting their blackened faces as they knelt exhausted and powerless on the pavement. One by one, the tiny children were brought out from the inferno. The firefighters did not need to speak. Their faces alone revealed that the desperate attempts to save the children had failed, as one by one the paramedics fought to save them. But as 5-year-old Jayden, 6-year-old Jessie, 7-year-old Jack, 9-year-old John, and 10-year-old Jade were placed on stretchers and taken away in silent, unlit ambulances, signalling that the 5 children were deceased. As these ambulances drove away, a firefighter emerged from the blaze carrying the last child, 13-year-old Duwayne, his body limp and blackened, but unlike his siblings, he was laid on the ground, and the paramedics placed a mask over his mouth and nose to assist him with breathing. They worked to stabilise the boy. Jamie and Darren were at the teenager's side, urging him to keep fighting, as the paramedics rushed him to the back of the ambulance. The siren blared, and the lights flashed as the emergency vehicle sped away. Jamie approached the child's father. Tears in his eyes, he couldn't bring himself to meet the father's gaze, as he uttered, "I am so sorry. I am sorry I couldn't save them." Dejected, Jamie and his brother made their way sullenly across the glistening black pavement. Entering their home, the pair remained silent, unable to comprehend the events of that morning. They sat on the sofa and wept. When interviewed later, Darren reflected, quote, "I have seen some things, and that is one thing I can honestly put my hand on my heart and say, I wouldn't wish my worst enemy to see that." His brother Jamie emotionally stated, "I lost a part of me, a big part, because I didn't feel like I did enough. I would have died without a shadow of a doubt, just to save one. Just one." Duwayne was taken to the Royal Derby Hospital, where his condition was deemed to be critical, his burns so severe that it was determined he required specialist care, and so was transferred 38 miles away to the Children's Hospital in Birmingham, where he was placed on the burns unit. The community were devastated by the loss of 5 young children in such a horrific manner. Tributes began to be placed outside the burnt-out shell of the house that had once been filled with children's laughter. Teddy bears, flowers, and candles were laid out on the grass as mourners young and old came to pay their respects. Some were strangers, others friends and relatives, all shocked and grief-stricken. Community groups came together, putting aside their faith, ethnicity, or any other differences. United in their sympathy, a local charity was established, called Catch Me When I Fall, with the aim of helping the bereaved family, and together a total of over £11,000 was raised. When it was revealed that the fire was being treated as an arson attack, the residents were sickened by the thought that someone would commit such a vile crime, and it wasn't long before gossip and speculation began to spread regarding the culprit, ranging from an ex-lover to a disgruntled individual who had been owed money. Just 3 days after the fire, despite surviving the initial blaze, 13-year-old Duwayne lost his fight for life, only adding to the pain of those who loved him. Pathologist Stuart Hamilton was given the unenviable task of performing the 6 post-mortems. He released his findings stating that each child had been, quote, rendered unconscious without necessarily having woken from sleep. He concluded that each of the 6 children had succumbed to smoke inhalation. An investigation was conducted into the fire, which determined that the point of ignition was in the hallway of the property, possibly caused by a flammable liquid being poured through the letterbox. It was believed that an excessive amount of accelerant had been used, intensifying the speed at which the fire spread, swiftly engulfing the UPVC door, the plastic melting and blistering in the growing heat. The intensity of the fire was increased by wooden panelling on the staircase, which was coated in yacht varnish, a highly combustible substance resulting in the increased potency of the inferno, stripping the plaster from the wall, exposing the brickwork underneath. In a search for oxygen, the flames were funneled towards an open window at the top of the stairs, where the wind forced the fire and smoke into the open doors of each of the bedrooms. The dense, toxic smoke descended from the ceiling and formed like a thick blanket over the sleeping children. Their lungs became filled with the deadly smoke, extinguishing oxygen and rendering them unconscious in a matter of minutes. It was determined that by the time the inferno had reached the upstairs bedrooms, it had exceeded 500 degrees C, or 932 degrees Fahrenheit. Investigators concluded that it was unlikely that anyone would have survived the combination of extreme heat and dense smoke. In the living room, the wall was blackened, with the soot deposited by the smoke. The carpet was charred, and the curtains had disintegrated. The children's plastic toys had melted and fused into one grotesque mass. The children's grey parrot, Crackle, whose cries had been heard, now lay silent in its cage. The whole house was a scene of devastation. Michael Patterson from Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service, who went into the inferno, described finding, quote, casualties everywhere, explaining how difficult the smoke made it to locate the children. He stated it was so thick the rooms were plunged into an eerie orange darkness, in which we had to resort to touch to identify the presence of an individual. Each child was found in their bed by the touch of a firefighter's hand. Speaking outside Derby Kingsway Fire Station, Dave Coss, watch manager at Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service, who participated in the fire investigation, spoke to the press regarding the fire, quote, it would have been heavy, thick with smoke. Visibility would have been non-existent, and it would have been very hot. In reality, anyone on the first floor didn't really stand a chance. The upstairs bedrooms and bathrooms were blackened by the smoke. The windows were black with smoke. Smoke had come down to floor level. It was thick and dirty everywhere. With any fire investigation, you always have to go open-minded. You're never led down an alley. You find the evidence, and the evidence tells you what happened. So from this point of view, from outside looking in, to us there had been a fire. It looked like it had been in the hallway downstairs, but we had to confirm that. The fire crews tend to work as a family, and they help each other out considerably. I am sure those who attended that fire went home to their families and reflected on what had happened. End quote. With the assistance of the fire service's dog, a Springer Spaniel named Freckle, the investigators were also able to determine that the source of the fire was indeed by the front door, where the dog signalled the existence of a flammable liquid on the floor at the front of the property. This was corroborated by a visible burn pattern, which indicated arson. As police worked on investigating leads, they became aware of an ex-girlfriend of the children's father. It transpired that he had been in a relationship with 29-year-old Lisa Willis, and 3 months before the fire, she had ended the relationship. Lisa was a mother of 5 children, 4 of whom were the offspring of the deceased children's father. On the day of the fire, Lisa was due to appear in court to gain full custody of her children, so police had to consider if she was in some way responsible for the arson attack, and ultimately the deaths of 6 innocent children. Looking into Lisa's background, she had a difficult upbringing, growing up in a one-parent household, which has been suggested can make children more likely to struggle to control their emotions, suffer from low self-esteem, depression and suicidal thoughts. Children may also underperform in education, be at higher risk of addiction or having a criminal record. Of course, there are other factors which can influence a child's behaviour, mental state and ultimately their future. These include poverty, exposure to violence, criminality and unstable relationships. For Lisa, whatever stability she had in her life was stolen from her when she was just 12 years old, when her mother passed away. This resulted in Lisa being raised by her older sister, and by the time she was 16, Lisa had had her first child. It was also at the age of 16 when she met the father of the 6 deceased children. Lisa's sister used to be a babysitter for the dad of 6, and one day, as Lisa and her sister were in Derby, she was introduced to him, at which point he invited her to come to his New Year's Eve celebration. At the party, the pair kissed, and from that point on began a relationship. However, after being together for 13 years and sharing 4 children, Lisa made the decision to end the relationship and broke off the affair in February 2012, 3 months before the fire. But a bitter custody battle began, and investigators questioned whether the fear of losing the custody of her children had motivated her to set the fire. As a key suspect, Lisa Willis and a man who has not been named was arrested, but after a number of hours of questioning and confirming the pair's alibis, it was concluded that they were not responsible for the crime. With the prime suspect ruled out, the investigation was back at square one, and in an effort to generate more leads, they arranged with the bereaved parents to make an appeal to the public. The distraught parents entered the conference room, hand in hand, turning to each other for comfort. Taking a seat before the press, the mother lowered her head, her red hair concealing her face, while her husband held her hand to reassure her. The wife unable to speak, she let her husband address those gathered.
First of all, I want to thank my 3 oldest children because they are helping us to cope with what's going on. And then there's a young lad called Daniel Stevenson who tried to get in the house, the same as myself, Joe across the road, then the Butler brothers. And of course there's the 4 firemen, the police, the ambulances, the doctors, the nurses, literally everybody who tried to help save our children. They couldn't. Excuse me a minute. I've actually been down to our home, and what we saw, we just cannot believe it. We grew up in a community that's had a lot of problems with violence and God knows what else, and to see this community to come together like they have, it's just too overwhelming. We've had people from America, France, even the travelling community. It's just, we've been to see them, it's just overwhelming, isn't it? But I say I can't express enough the police, the fire brigade, the ambulance services, because what we feel, them poor gentlemen from the fire brigade saw what we've seen. You know, my heart goes out to them, because it's not just us that's suffering, it's them as well. It's everybody. But there's one thing I would request is please leave my family alone. If you've got any questions or anything at all, please don't come through me or my family. Please go to the police, because what's happening at the moment, you're disrupting what these officers are trying to do. So please, I beg you, leave us alone and let us try and live in peace and quiet. That's all I ask. We decided that through our son Duwayne, and unfortunately the last one to pass away, that we're going to donate his organs to save another child, which is what we want, because if you can save another child, that makes us happy. It takes a bit of the pain away, and we can't express our gratitude to everybody that's been concerned with the case, with what's been going on.
I now want to take a moment to play you a clip from another press conference, in which the father of 3-year-old Francesca Bimson pleaded for assistance in catching the person responsible for the arson attack on their family home in Merseyside, which claimed his daughter's life.
I just want to appeal for anyone to come forward to give any information regarding the death of our daughter. The family is absolutely devastated, as you can all imagine. And on the night that it happened, we were looking forward to having a lovely Christmas, which Francesca, being only 3, she was really excited about, and looking through catalogues. And we just been to the Asda to buy a Christmas tree, which we put up in the living room, and she was dancing around and saying, I want this, I want that, out the catalogue, which, you know, all 3-year-olds do. But on the night, as I say, it was just a lovely night. It was just so exciting, looking forward to Christmas. I was even excited myself, as you do when you put your Christmas tree up. You know, you're thinking about what your kids' faces are going to be like on Christmas Day, and unfortunately, someone's robbed us of that, you know, vision. All I can say is they're an absolute coward, and I really hope out there, you know, people out there will come forward, because they've ripped us apart as a family. And she's looking forward to starting nursery. She should have started on Monday in New Park with the sister Christina. We appeal, anyone please, if there's a pang of conscience in anybody out there, someone must know something. and we just need people to start talking, because it's not the actions of a normal person what's happened. They've tried to kill all of us in bed. The safest place is when you go to bed at night, and for us, that night nearly cost us all of our lives.
There is a clear difference between the two fathers. Kieran Bimson is focused on his child, on their family and the devastating impact of losing their little girl. His response would be what you'd expect of a grieving father. On the other hand, the father of Duwayne, Jade, Jack, John, Jesse and Jayden did not mention his children once. He focused on thanking everyone who had helped that night, and not once did he refer to the devastating loss of his children, nor did he appeal for help to find the person responsible. Professor Dawn Archer, a specialist in linguistics at Manchester Metropolitan University, told the Derby Telegraph, quote, "We have to remember this was a public appeal, which was understood to be taking place to try help find those responsible for the fire, which killed 6 children. And we would look to see if he behaves like we would expect. There are many channels of communication, and we would look at a person's body language and facial expressions, and see if they are saying something different to the words they use." In the press conference, the father holds his sad expression and emotions for too long, and his sobs appear fake. She continued, "In most people, emotion comes and goes, and when someone says something positive, like, 'When he said something good is going to come out of this,' in the case of the family donating Duwayne's organs, he holds on to his sad expression. Often a person who is sad will drop their shoulders and hold themselves different, and this will make their voice low, but in his case he continued to be loud and vocal. His wife is the same, with her eyebrows held in a triangle shape, looking sad throughout the whole conference. Also, the only child he mentions by name is Duwayne, and that is when he talks about donating his organs. No other child is named, but he does name neighbours who helped. This suggests psychological distancing, and he could be doing this because he is either sad, it could also be because he is guilty." End quote. This behaviour did not go unnoticed, and suspicion soon fell upon the parents. And on the 28th of May, the pair were arrested in Derby city centre. They were held for questioning for 2 days before being charged with starting the fire and causing the deaths of their 6 children. On the 11th of February 2013, exactly a year to the day that Lisa Willis had ended her relationship with the children's father, the 8-week trial began. The parents appeared in court alongside their friend and co-defendant, Paul Mosley, and all 3 were facing a charge of manslaughter. Some of the information covered in the trial I will feature in next week's episode, when I take a closer look at who the parents are, explore why they were notorious even before the fire. But for now, I want to focus on the night the children lost their lives, and those who fought to rescue them. The jury heard harrowing details from those who were on the scene at 18 Victory Gardens on May the 11th, 2012. Amongst them were 6 firefighters, the Butler brothers and other neighbours, including Callum Stevenson, who assisted in the rescue efforts. Jamie Butler told the court how he put his own life in danger, even though he risked leaving his children without a father. He refused to heed the warning from the police, who asked him to leave the scene, telling the jury, quote, "I wouldn't leave without trying to get those babies out." He proceeded to describe how after the fire brigade took over, he located the children's father and apologised. Prosecutor Richard Latham QC asked him, "What did you apologise for?" Unable to control his emotions, Jamie Butler replied, "For not being able to save his children." During her summing up of the events that night, Mrs. Justice Furwell stated, quote, "We have heard from people who were heroic, firefighters, police officers, and impressively, civilians, who did all they could to save those 6 children. Remember this truly was a shocking event, and it is safe to assume they had never seen anything like this in their lives. You heard a compelling picture from all of them of the thick, black, acrid smoke." Addressing the defendants, the judge continued, "You poured petrol on the floor, Paul Mosley was responsible for removing the containers from your home. You set light to it. After a short while, the mother spoke to the emergency services. It became clear that there was no chance of a successful rescue, and the children perished. The latter half of the 999 call is harrowing evidence of the unravelling of the plan. The jury was spared some of the most harrowing details of the removal of the children from 18 Victoria Road. Mercifully, their deaths were swift, and it would seem without pain. No one could have listened to the evidence of the firefighters and not be moved by what they had done and what they had seen in their efforts to combat the fire and save the children. Your neighbours were traumatised by what they saw. Several of them tried to help. They risked their own safety to try and help. Their bravery was required as a result of your callous stupidity. It is clear that they have been shattered, as has the local community, generally by the knowledge that you and your co-defendants started this fire deliberately. I recognise, as I must, that the offences of which you have been convicted are offences of manslaughter and not murder. That means that I sentence on the basis that you did not intend either to kill your children or to cause them serious harm. But let me be clear, what you did intend plainly was to subject your children to a terrifying ordeal. They were to be woken from their beds in the middle of the night with their home on fire, so you could rescue them and be a hero. Their terror was the price they were going to pay for your callous selfishness. In fact, they paid with their 6 young lives. They had no chance of survival, and I am quite sure when you set that fire you were not thinking about them, because you simply didn't care. You were going to get your own way." End quote. I have made a conscious choice to leave out the names of the children's parents, as they have become the focus of media coverage, and I wanted this episode to be about the victims, and those who fought to save the youngsters. I want to pay tribute to the neighbours, amongst them Jamie and Darren Butler, who have been devastated by that night. Riddled with guilt, they have suffered from PTSD, and it is their interviews in the numerous documentaries that always brings me to tears. Because of their selfless act of bravery, they risked everything to save another man's children, not knowing that it was because of him that they had been put in that position. All those who came to the aid of the family during the incident and afterwards, when they offered support, sympathy, and raised money for the bereaved parents, should be commended for their compassion, unity, and bravery. The whole community were betrayed by these parents, whose children paid the ultimate price for their selfish actions. When Duwayne, Jade, Jack, John, Jesse and Jayden were laid to rest, their joint funeral cortege travelled through the streets of Derby, each white coffin carried in a glass-sided carriage. Jade led the way. Her carriage was pink, and the white horse was adorned with pink feathers and pink covering on its back. Her name was also written in pink on the side of her casket. She was followed by her brothers, each carriage drawn by a black horse, with blue plumes of feathers decorating their heads. Each of the boys' white coffins bore the name of a child in blue, and all the caskets were decorated with a picture of their favourite things. The order of service contained a description of each child. 13-year-old Duwayne had the emblem of his favourite football team, Derby County. He was described as, quote, "a charming and caring young boy that was turning into a young man, who was shy of having his photo taken with his older sister Michaela, even though he was a real ladies' man, always having endless queues of girls fancying him. He never seemed to mind that." His voice was starting to break, becoming deeper than his older brothers, David and Richard. Duwayne loved to spend his time with the family pet, Crackle, an African grey parrot, who was always shouting after him and his mum. Being the eldest brother, he became independent, understanding, and a protector to his younger brothers and sister. In his spare time, he had a talent for music, especially the violin, and loved to play sports. Enjoyed visits to local fisheries with his elder brother, Mickey. Duwayne's love for football showed as he was a season ticket holder at Derby County. He used to love match days. cheering on the mighty Rams with his younger brothers and his dad. At home, he was always competing with his siblings on the trampoline, showing off his tricks and flips." End quote. 10-year-old Jade's casket had the image of a blonde-haired princess in a pink gown. In the order of service, Jade was remembered as a beautiful princess who became a mother hen to her younger brothers and was cared for by her older brother Duwayne. In her spare time, she loved to be creative with pictures and play on Just Dance 2 and High School Musical 3 on the Nintendo Wii, playing against her big sister Michaela, always losing but always dignified. She had a permanent smile on her face and was always content. She was full of energy and always tried to get involved with David, Richard, and all the boys when they were having a rough and tumble, but she was never allowed to get involved. At school, she was very intelligent and would boost the class morale. She was part of the chaplaincy team and well regarded by all the students and teachers whenever possible. End quote. Toy soldiers were the image for 9-year-old John, who had dreams of joining the army. His memorial stated, "He was a cheeky chappie, always lively and ready to pick a fight with all the boys. Even if he lost the fight, he would come back like a boomerang with more vengeance. One fight was never enough. He was determined to be the last man standing." He was named Supergrass, as he would always worm his way out of getting into trouble. He would always crack a smile and find a joke. John was full of swagger and confidence. When watching Derby County, he would always get involved in the banter. Teachers described him as cheerful, smiley and polite. John loved to play in the garden on his bike, being adventurous, and his daredevil personality would come in to compete with Duwayne to jump off the climbing frames onto the trampoline. John wanted to pursue a career as a soldier. End quote. 7-year-old Jack's casket was adorned with a picture of a Nintendo DS with Peppa Pig on the screen. He was remembered, as a really pretty boy with bright blue eyes. He was cute, cuddly and content with everything. He loved to spend most of his time on his Nintendo DS, whilst his brothers and sister enjoyed the garden. He was smart and would complete computer games on the Nintendo Wii. He was a real computer geek. He would be glued to the TV watching Peppa Pig. It was his favourite children's programme. He was like Duwayne, with his shyness and bashfulness. He was the quietest sibling, and he was a delight to be around. He was always the first one in the fights to run off crying to his mummy for some cuddles and kisses, and then he'd be back to his gaming. End quote. Jessie, the energetic 6-year-old who loved sport, had a wrestling logo. Little boy with a cheeky smile was described as crazy, clumsy, and cheerful. He would be so happy for family members to visit, so he could show off all his toys. He would show off to everyone and constantly try to get your attention. He would come in from the garden, head to toe mucky. He was a loud character in the family and very mischievous. Whenever he got into trouble, he would storm off like a teenager to his room. He was fearless, getting into scrambles with his brothers, with no care in the world. He also had a loving nature towards his youngest brother. He would love nothing more than snuggling up in bed with his brothers watching movies before bedtime. End quote. And Jayden, the youngest, had the image of a dinosaur. Remembering the youngest child, the statement read, "Jayden, being the baby of the family, was looked after by his brothers and mothered by Jade. His mum and dad nicknamed him the Miracle Baby after being born early. It never stopped him living life to the full. He was bouncy and hyperactive and always wanting to have fights with the big boys. He loved lots of cuddles from family and friends. Jayden's main pleasure in life was food. He could eat 7 packets of crisps in one go if he could get away with it. He would go into the garden clean and come back to the house messy within minutes. He was a real copycat and looked up to his brothers." End quote. This episode is dedicated to these 6 innocent children who had their future stolen by the 2 people who were supposed to protect them, their parents. I wanted this episode to focus on the children, who are often lost in the more scandalous stories involving their parents, particularly their father. Next week I will expose who this man is, his criminal past, and the reason he is surrounded by scandal and hatred, all of which culminated in the tragic deaths of Duwayne, Jade, Jack, John, Jesse, and Jayden. Episode 41 will be available next week. So in the meantime, keep an eye on those shadows.